Guys, I'm Chris Lato, retired F-16 pilot turned UAP investigating YouTuber. I'm very proud of this video and feel very humbled and lucky to get a chance to talk with someone like Leslie Kean. She is just a titan in the field of unidentified aerial phenomena. We talked through her whole career, essentially starting back in 2000. She started in 2000 with her first article, how she had to fight to get that article into print, all the way till 2017, where she was a contributing author for the Glowing Auras and Black Money article in the New York Times. So the famous New York Times article that has really propelled us to where we are today, on the cusp of getting an office built in the US government to research unidentified aerial phenomena. Welcome, I'm here with Leslie Kean. Recently finished her book, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. I thought it was just an amazing book, compilation of really everything. As I'm starting my career, I guess, as a ufologist, encapsulated kind of everything I was looking for, trying to find. So it was great to have it all in one book. So I'm so happy you're here. Thanks for coming on the show. So welcome, Leslie Kean.
Thanks, Chris. Very pleased to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Yes, and so you wrote that book many years ago. You think it's still interesting for people like me?
I mean, at least up until 2010. I mean, there's a lot that's happened since 2010. So, but I mean, the cases in that book are still really solid. The only thing that's there's been a question about is that Belgian photo, which I used to just love that photo, and I went to Belgium and got to see the original and all this stuff, Yeah. But the shooter of that photo has since come out and said that he faked it. And there's some question about whether he really did or not, because he's in litigation with somebody who owns the copyright, has been making money out, and there's this whole mess going on. And he refused to set it up the way he did it and show investigators how he hoaxed it when they went and asked him. So who knows, but that's really disappointing that picture has been called into question. But I think everything else in the book, if you just want, it's just very basic understanding. And I think the fact that many chapters are written by others, it's really a shared book with many other people.
Yeah.
And that I give them credit. I mean, I think there's 4 generals in the book and a former governor and all kinds of high-level people who wrote their own chapters. So people can hear directly from them, not just me saying what they said, quoting them or describing them. And to me, that's a lot of what the power of the book is the writings of the actual people themselves who contributed.
Yeah, the governor of Arizona. And he was a retired full bird.
Yeah, he's retired, but that was such an interesting story. I mean, the whole Phoenix Lights case. I'm sure any of your viewers who are, into UFOs are familiar with that story. But the fact that he, ridiculed it at a press conference at the time with dressing up as chief of staff as an alien, and then 10 years later admitted that he actually saw it himself, and then started to advocate for this issue and for the establishment of a government agency, which is something I've been advocating for. He came on a press conference in 2007 that I organized with James Fox, which was the same year he had come out with this admission, and he stood up at the podium and made a statement about it and said, we need a government agency to get to the bottom of this. So it was an incredible transformation, incredible story.
Yeah, it's just interesting for a lot of reasons. It's just he basically says, between 8 and 8:30 on the evening of March 13, 1997, during my second term as governor of Arizona, I witnessed something that defied logic and challenged my reality. A massive delta-shaped craft silently navigating over the Squaw Peak in the Phoenix Mountain Preserve. So he sees that. He clearly sees it. And then he goes to talk to his wife, and he says, as soon as I reached home, I told my wife, Ann, about it. She listened attentively, and we both thought long and hard about whether I should make it public. Eventually, at least for the time being, we reached the conclusion that I should not because of the ridicule from the media.
Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? Yep. And he also was afraid that it would just take over everything and he wouldn't even be able to do his job as governor. He just thought, but it may have been the wrong choice he made, and he upset a lot of his constituents, but he later acknowledged that and apologized, basically. I mean, I don't think something like that would happen today. So that shows how far we've come.
So you think it's changed? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, can you imagine if, hundreds and hundreds of witnesses saw something flying over Arizona now? I
Yeah.
mean, it would be so well documented. I mean, there wasn't, there was no video that survived that event. And there would be so much documentation now. And I think the climate has changed so much that a governor who happened to see it would not have to feel like he couldn't say anything. That's my opinion. I just don't think it would happen.
Yeah. Yeah. He
So,
was also a
yeah,
retired retired pilot.
right. He knew how to
Yes.
recognize things. He was smart. I
Yeah.
actually
He
went with him
obviously.
to the location where he saw it, and got to know him very well starting in 2007. So he's a very honorable guy, and I really admire him for speaking out about it and doing everything he's done to help move this forward. He was a real, up until the time of my book, between 2007 and 2010, he was a really important figure along with John Podesta, sort of helping get this thing out. And he actually wrote his own little, maybe 3-page chapter in my book. It was short, but it was really wonderful to have him explain this in his own words, why he did it and why he feels differently about it now.
Yeah, we need more people like him speaking out, obviously, because you say he's an honorable man, and it sounds like he is, and he did make the tough decision. Like he had to say to all those thousands of people that he lied, essentially, right? He wrote in the book here, he talked to his wife, they talked it over, and then he, even an honorable man, made the decision to lie and say, no, I didn't see anything, because of ridicule. It's just so
Yeah, I
strong.
mean, I don't know if he actually lied because he was never asked if he saw it. He just didn't volunteer the information.
I guess.
I mean, I don't know if you want to call it a lie. Anyway, that's a minor point. It's a minor point. But,
it's a minor point. I think,
yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think it's a lie. It sounds like a lie to me. If you're the leader and all these hundreds of people are calling, and then you say, yeah, it must have been flares. I mean, he obviously knew it wasn't those flares.
Oh,
he saw something different. Yeah.
I don't think he ever claimed that it was something else. He actually tried to get information about it. He called the Air Force bases. He called, he did everything he could to try to get information, and he couldn't get anything. So he just sort of moved on, and didn't pay attention to it. And then he described it as sort of people being in a state of hysteria. So he wanted to calm it down and make light of it. It just, didn't work.
Yeah.
Did not work.
Yeah, that was a crazy one. And, I even went to Luke Air Force Base. That's where I did my initial training for F-16s. But that was in 2004, 2003. And we heard nothing about, I learned about the Phoenix Lights later after I left,
right.
Years later. There was nothing in the Air Force, nothing mentioned about it. Yeah, zero. Cool. Well, let's go through a couple of these questions. So this is from Rob Warnecki. What made you go from investigating wrongful convictions to UFOs? Seems like a strange segue into the field.
Yeah, it is a strange. I totally get that response. Yeah. And it was more, I mean, I did report a lot on wrongful convictions when I was at KPFA Radio in Berkeley, but I was really more involved with reporting on Burma. I mean, that was my, I was very involved with, I went to Burma and I did a lot of articles with another journalist about the problems with the country of Burma and its struggle for democracy. So that was that and wrongful convictions. So I was focused on the reason I had a sort of curiosity about UFOs. I'd read a few books, but it was just like a interest, like a very low level interest, like it would be for anybody who might have read like Whitley Strieber's Communion or something like that,
Yeah.
And then I got this report in the mail, as I wrote about in my book, from a colleague in France called the Cometa report, which some people may know what that was, but it was a 90-page study undertaken by high-level people in France. And they were all retired, but they were high-level military people. There were generals. There was a 4-star, I think a 3-star. I don't remember exactly, but their ranks. But a number of generals. There was an admiral in the group. There was the former head of the government agency in France who had, investigated UFOs for a long time. The chief of police, scientists. They formed this group. They spent 3 years investigating this. And they only studied official, aviation and official cases from around the world, the very best cases there are. And they wrote up this 90-page study about it, and they came to the conclusion that the best explanation for the objects that they studied was what they called the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And they talked about that was the most valid and the most rational and way to explain these cases for which they had been able to basically rule out conventional explanations, because these were cases where there was enough data to do that. And so I was sitting there, I get this thing in the mail, and my colleague in France says, this reports, this is if you have an advanced copy of an English translation, the only person in America who has it. This report is going to be released, and I think Rockefeller had paid for the translation and everything. And he said, do you want to do something with it? And I said, yes. And I just felt, when you have people at that level saying that it is likely, it's the best hypothesis that we have extraterrestrial visitors coming here. I mean, it was like, whoa, this is huge. So it was because of the access to a report at that level, written by people at that level who, carried a lot of weight. And I thought to myself, what if the equivalent people in America made the same statement that these French people were making? It would rock the world, right? It would be front page news. So I just recognized it as a really big story and found it completely fascinating. And I thought, I thought I had a real scoop. And so I spent quite a few months looking into the topic, because I didn't know much about it, and eventually pitched a story to a lot of editors who I'd published with before from various papers. And in those days, you could publish freelance articles. It was a very different climate for journalists than it is now. But I had published a whole bunch of stories on Burma with a lot of newspapers. So they knew me and they liked my work. And so I went to these places, and it was really hard. I didn't even use the word UFO when I made the pitch, but they just couldn't handle it, except for the Boston Globe. This one editor at the Boston Globe, who I'd written probably 3 or 4 stories with, and she really respected me, and she was willing to do the story, but it was really touch and go, and she almost dropped. At one point she said, forget it, we're not doing it. I mean, it's hard to imagine today when every journalist out there wants to cover this. But in those days, that was like it was in 2000 that it actually was published finally. Wow. 20 years ago, 21 years ago, 22 years ago, it was so different, Chris. I mean, it was like these people, and the only reason she was able to run it was because she was the boss of the forum, of the section in which it was published. It's like a Sunday news analysis section. She had nobody above her that could tell her what to do. The other papers that I went to, some of them said, oh yeah, we want this. And then they'd come back and say, sorry, I didn't make it through the chain of command here or whatever. But it was like this risky thing. And it was a very conservative story. I mean, it wasn't saying a lot of crazy stuff at all. So it's interesting for me to reflect back on that and realize, my God, things have really changed. But in any case, that's how I got started. Once that story came out, I was so hooked on this topic. I just wanted to learn more. I was also shocked by how little, it got a huge response from the UFO people, but how little response it got from, Congress. I expected Congress to be all over it, or the leading investigative journalists of the day to like jump all over it and write like long stories for the New Yorker or whatever. I was just a freelancer. I didn't have the kind of access that journalists have who work for something like the Washington Post or the New York Times or something. So I thought they'll take it. They should take the next step, but nobody did anything. And that was sort of my wake up call for like how bizarre it was that this topic, the way it was treated, and everybody acted like UFOs didn't even exist. So that was part of the motivation for me to keep going with it, plus my profound curiosity in what this whole thing was, my realization that these don't seem to be like they're from here, but I don't know. So anyway, I just eventually stopped working at this radio station where I was working and did this full time. But that's how I started. And I was like on fire after that, I never stopped.
Yeah. So but you wrote a afterlife book, right? After your UFOs, your next book was Afterlife, which is I'm very excited to read that one as well.
That was that was way later. It came out in 2017, I think. So I started working on it in 2013. So yeah, it was a few years after my book came out in 2010. So my book in 2010 was sort of a culmination of 10 years of reporting and investigation and press conferences and all kinds of stuff. And then after that, the History Channel did a special based on my book. And then I kind of thought, you know, I've really said all I can say about UFOs right now. And my publisher said, do you want to write a book about something else? And I was really interested in this, all this evidence for the survival of consciousness. So then I jumped into that. Yeah, you're right. And then in 2017, when everything changed, I was really back full time on UFOs again.
Oh, excellent. So now you're back on UFOs full time. Is that you consider it?
Yeah. I mean, I still do some work related to the other topic, which I'm interested in both of them, very interested in it. And some people even are discussing how they might relate to each other in some way. That's a whole other question. But yeah, I mean, the book I wrote called Surviving Death, it was made into a 6-part series, documentary series for Netflix. So that just came out about a year ago. So I was very involved with that as well, with the production of that series. And now I'm working on a series on UFOs for a major network. I'm not allowed to say which one, but that's been occupying all my time. Yeah, so I would say, you know, right now I'm really focused on UFOs.
Oh, excellent. And so you really think it's totally changed, though? The landscape has completely changed from 2000.
I really do. I mean, if you think about May of last year, of 2021, do you remember the media frenzy that took place right before this June report came out? I mean, everybody was covering this. And then it was on 60 Minutes. And the New Yorker wrote a huge feature story on it. You know, I mean, it was like they couldn't get enough of it in the media. When you think back to what I had to go through to get this one story published in 2000, it's a radical change. It's all because the government has come around and acknowledged that they're real. It's now official. And that gives the media permission to write about it without feeling like they're going to be ridiculed.
But I still get the sense that they leave it out, you know? I still get the sense that most people, or most of those editors will choose to not go with the UFO story, you know, if they had other options. I still get that impression.
I don't know. It probably depends on what editors you're talking about. I mean, certainly Politico is really into this. The Hill has been writing about it a lot lately. The New York Times is hard to get them to cover it, but they did I co-wrote a series of stories at the New York Times between 2017 and 2020 that had a huge impact. So, I mean, I don't know. I just know that in that period of time, right before that June report came out, it was, I mean, you could not believe every single media person wanted to cover this. And I think, I don't know. I think they pretty much do now. I don't know of places that ridicule it, really. I'm sure there are bloggers and stuff that ridicule it, but I think it's taken pretty seriously overall now.
And so looking back, that was, I mean, you were a contributor author on the Glowing Auras 2017 article. And that article, I think, started the whole modern disclosure movement, or I don't know, at least from my perspective, it seems like that started this most recent movement. Can you talk about how making that article, creating it, any interesting things around it?
I mean, it did. I think it started this whole snowballing thing that happened, but it was really Lou Elizondo who started it. Because the way it all happened was I was invited to meet with Lou Elizondo in October. I think it was around October 4th of that year. I went to a meeting in Washington, and Chris Mellon was present, and Jim Semivan and Hal Puthoff. And they were the ones that actually had invited me to meet Lou, because Lou was resigning from, I think everybody knows that Lou Elizondo was the head of the government program. He was the head of a Department of Defense program that had been studying UFOs in secret for a decade. And nobody even knew this program existed. And I was out there in the world advocating for a government agency to be set up. You know, of course, I wouldn't have wanted it to be like that, which was a totally secret one.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I was, you know, they had talked about it a bit with To the Stars Academy before I met Lou. I think maybe it was after that. I don't remember. But in any case, I knew nothing about this. And for me to go, so I got to go down to Washington. I sat right across the table from Lou for about over 3 hours with these incredible people there. And they showed me all these documents. They showed me the 3 videos. Lou didn't, but they did. His colleagues did. The famous letter from Harry Reid that has now been released. Lou's resignation letter, which had been written to General Mattis, Secretary of Defense. I read that letter and I just could not believe what he was saying. And then I just got to talk to him for a long time. And the idea behind this meeting was to take this to the New York Times, because he was resigning because he needed attention to be brought to this from the outside, because he was not getting the support he needed from inside. So that moment, that was probably the peak moment, Chris, of any moment in all. I mean, after covering this thing for 17 years, it was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe I was sitting at that meeting and hearing what I was hearing. It was just mind blowing to me. It was 17 years. I mean, I did my first story in 2000 and this was in 2017. So, it just was, I just was blown away by how important it was. And they had all the documentation. Everybody was going on the record. They had the videos. It was just clear to me that it was a huge story. So I then went to, but I had no relationship to the New York Times, but my close friend, Ralph Blumenthal, colleague and friend, was a freelancer for the Times, and he'd been on staff there for decades. And he was at that point still freelancing for the New York Times. And he's the guy who wrote the book on John Mack that just came out. And he and I had many conversations over the years about UFOs. He's very interested in it. And he'd written on abductions and experiencers before. And so I went to him and he wrote a pitch to the lead editor at the New York Times. And then we got a meeting with Mark Mazzetti, who is the head of the investigations bureau in the Washington bureau. He happened to be in New York. We sat down with him, showed him everything. And he took it back to Washington. And about a week later, we got the green light. And we were assigned to work with Helene Cooper, who is this amazing reporter from the Washington bureau, who's award-winning. And she's their Defense Department person. So she has incredible access to the Defense Department. And what a gift it was to work with her. That's how it all started. And we just spent a couple of months getting the story together and doing interviews. And, we got an interview with Harry Reid. Actually, Helene flew out to Nevada to meet personally with Harry Reid. It was so important to the story. We had no idea what he was going to say, whether it would be just a 5-minute thing, but she sat with him for a long time and he talked all about the funding process that went on and why he set it up and how he's glad he did it. And it was just amazing. And so, that was a big part of it. And just talking to Elizondo and other people and laying out how the whole thing happened and then presenting the videos. So that's how the whole story happened. And it was on the front page of the Sunday paper, which was the print edition. It came out on a Saturday and then a print edition on Sunday. So, and that's sort of what that led to, Chris, was members of Congress wanting to be briefed on this. Excellent. That's sort of what was the next step, because they said, there's a government program and they didn't even know about it, right? Yeah. The DoD has been studying this since 2007 and we don't know anything about it. And it's like, there are objects flying around. We don't know where they're from or what they are, or they have incredible technology. Well, we want to know more about it. So they started to get briefed. And that's sort of how the whole thing started to build towards where we are today.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I mean, when you think back in any time in the future, right? If this continues the way it appears to be going, it's going to lead back to that story. It's very interesting,
Yeah, I mean, cool. I feel so fortunate to have been part of it. And the reason it happened, I think, was because I'd known Chris Mellon for quite a few years, and I'd known Hal Puthoff for a long time as well. And they trusted me, they recognized that. I mean, I had many conversations with Hal for so many years, and they wanted somebody who could cover this in the way that it should be covered, with some kind of knowledge of the topic, right? And it would really take it seriously. And so I think I felt really honored to be the person that they asked to be that person. They also knew I could probably get it into the door of the New York Times. So yeah, it was just amazing moments there. And Lou was it was literally the day he had resigned, and he was really nervous. He didn't know what was going to happen to him at that point, you know. He didn't know what was going to happen to him in terms of how he was going to make a living, and whether the DOD was going to come after him, and whether there'd be repercussions for him. And, you know, he was used to being in the shadows. He was a counterintelligence officer. He was not used to being out in the public arena. So he was really, I'll never forget how nervous he was, basically. And think about where he has come since then. He's now, and he and Chris Mellon have played such an important role in over these last 4 years. But that first time I met him, you know, he didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah, he's definitely, I can imagine, because it was terrifying for me to publish anything, you know, and most people in the military as well. You know, you try and we'd have media come to our squadron, you know, and it would be, does anyone want to give an interview? You know, and everyone would just run, you know, like away from the media. You know, it's I don't know why there's a timidness or shyness built into the military. You know, we just don't like talking on camera. I think.
Well, I think, isn't it partly because people are afraid of repercussions to their job? I mean, if they talk about something as weird as UFOs, I mean, that's what we've been told by many pilots, is that just there's a fear of ridicule and repercussion that might happen.
And, I think it's the same ridicule, though, that I think it's just the human ridicule. It's that same thing the governor felt, you know, we just talked about. Like, why didn't he, you know, he's the governor, right? He's supposed to be the leader in charge, but he didn't come clean with his constituents, right? The people he's supposed to be serving, ultimately. I don't think it's a fault on him. I think it shows how difficult it is, because he was able to come out and say, hey, I hit it, you know, I made a mistake, and I did see it. You know, he came out, right? And I think that's the honorable person. I think you're going to have many other there's probably thousands of other people who are in that position who just, you know, didn't take the honorable way.
It's also harder when people are active duty. Once they're retired, they feel much more comfortable in speaking out. I mean, that's just been consistently the case. And the same with pilots. When we did our second story in the New York Times, which is in May of 2019, and we reported on the Roosevelt sightings, and we had Ryan Graves as our main source, who ended up being on 60 Minutes in 2021. It was so hard for us to get those pilots to go on the record. I mean, the only reason we got Ryan was he had done something for the History Channel, you know, so he'd already done it. But we spoke to about probably 7 other pilots or something like that, and none of them would go on the record in the story.
Yes.
So, you know, I do think times have changed. I mean, even since 2019, maybe more of them would be willing to talk now. And I think this recent legislation has sort of opened the door for people to feel comfortable doing it. I mean, our government is saying they want people to talk out. They want to know more. So things are going to have to change. And I think more people are going to start coming forward.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I'm waiting for any pilots to contact me. You know, my email's in the about page. So if anyone wants to go on the record, man, I'll talk to you.
Exactly. You're a fellow pilot. They should contact you.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised I haven't been contacted. Maybe it'll just take a little time. So are you planning on writing any follow-up books?
I don't know. Maybe next year. Right now, I'm very involved with this series that I'm helping to produce for a major network, and that's full time. So I don't know. That's the answer to that question.
Yeah, excellent. Do you think we're heading towards disclosure, or is it going to be a repeat of, I don't know, the 70 years of the past?
Well, when you say disclosure, I'm never quite sure what that word means.
I don't either. I don't know. You know, I'm relatively new as well. Do you think we'll find out everything they know, everything the government knows?
Well, I mean, there's so much that's classified, and I'm sure a lot of it's going to remain classified. So I don't know. I don't know how much we're going to know about everything the government knows, but we've had incredible revelations. I mean, the government has acknowledged that UFOs exist, And they've basically acknowledged that they're not ours, meaning American. And they've almost said they're not Russian or Chinese. I mean, they've said we don't have evidence that they're Russian or Chinese. And some other high-level officials have spoken out and said, I don't think they could be Russian or Chinese. I mean, if we get to a point where it becomes a fact that they're not Russian, Chinese, or American, maybe that's disclosure as people define it. I don't know, but I think we're moving towards that point. And to me, that's the big moment. And we're almost there, because if they're not from those three countries, they couldn't be somewhere. They couldn't have been made on Earth, let's face it.
Yeah.
And I think that people like Kristen Gillibrand and people in the intelligence committees who have been briefed on this and been given classified information, I think they know that these are not from here. And the pressure has to stay on them. I mean, the reason they're going to talk about this is because of pressure. You know, if the New York Times story had never happened and the briefings for Congress had never happened, then maybe we wouldn't even know anything still. You know, it's not like they want to talk about it, but the door has opened and they don't have a choice at this point. And there is momentum. It's moving forward. So it can't go backwards. I really don't think it can. With this legislation that just passed in the NDAA, we're going to have this office that's going to do all these things and provide reports. And the reports are never as good as everybody wants. But I think we need to just be willing to look at this in stages and try to focus on what the good things are that have come out, the positive things. Even in the June 25th report, there were some important things that came out. So I feel very positive about how things are going. And I don't know, the way I see it is once it really becomes a certainty that they're not Russian, Chinese, or American, we've crossed the line. We were in a new paradigm at that point. And we're moving in that direction as far as I see it.
The June 25th report, the preliminary assessment, I thought was actually very good because they put in the numbers, right? They put in actual numbers for incidents. And they put in, we have 80 that have multiple sensors on them, 143, we don't know what it is, unidentified. And then we have 80 where we have multiple sensors. And the multiple sensors is really powerful for me, because it's from different sources. If you have radar and you have a visual observer, that's two different mediums. It's very strong. And then they had they said 18 of those is they're doing advanced maneuvering that we can't do.
Right. Yeah, no, that was all important. Yeah. And it was in there that they said they're not American, as I recall. And they said we don't have evidence of them being Russian or Chinese, but of course we need to find out if they belong to an adversary. But, that was important, even though people were upset there wasn't more, but the classified report obviously had more. And, it's what's really most important. I think Lou has made this point too, is that at this point, it's what's most important is that the members of our government get as much information as possible. That's more important right now than the general public having it, because the government are the ones that are going to move the whole thing forward. And they've been motivated now to create this office that just passed as a result of what they've been briefed on. So, I mean, that's something to celebrate, even though we, the people, I think we have a much bigger right to information, obviously, than we've been granted. I mean, why should they be able to sit on all of this? But I know that there are people working on that who believe that, and we just have to let it happen. As everything has to happen in the time that's required for it to happen. If things happen too soon, it could backfire. It could set us back in a way. We just have to let it roll out. And I think a lot of things are going to happen next year that are going to be exciting for everyone.
2022. Yeah, I keep hearing that from different people. There's I know 3 different people I've talked to who are working on projects. They can't tell me what they are, but they tell me it's going to be exciting.
If we're going to get more reports to Congress, and we're going to get more, unclassified reports have to be provided. And there are people working on trying to get more photographs and videos released, which should happen, because if they're not national security problems, why shouldn't the world have access to them? I mean, there, obviously there are going to be people that are going to try to resist that as much as possible. But, and what I think is really interesting too in the new legislation is the whole thing about health impacts and physiological effects of UFOs that are going to be reported on. She also they talk in this legislation about reports on efforts to capture or exploit discovered UAP. I mean, that line, efforts to capture or exploit discovered UAP.
Yes.
That's supposed to be included in the reports. I mean, that has never been said before, you know?
Yeah.
So,
well, I actually don't, but it's good to hear. Yes.
Yeah. And they're, setting up teams of field investigators and they're
science plan, the nuke
coordinating
stuff.
with our allies is another really important component. That is already happening behind the scenes, but it's written into the legislation that's another mandate that we have to coordinate with our allies to find out what's going on here. I mean, it's just such a powerful bit of legislation as long as it plays out the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, they did. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure who wrote it, but they did a great job. I mean, they really did. I thought they included everything we could possibly get, besides forcing the government to somehow work with like the Galileo project. But I don't think that's how that you can even do that anyway. I don't know how you would do that.
They took that out, right? They had that in there earlier, and then they took it out. That they were going to be linked to Galileo and some of these other citizens groups, but I'm sure that they're going to benefit from the work of the Galileo project. I think it's a great project, and but they didn't write that into the legislation, but that's okay.
It had everything else.
Yeah.
So in your experience, they're motivated. The Congress has been really motivated now. I mean,
well, a number of people are. I mean, certainly Senator Gillibrand and who was behind this legislation, and Senator Rubio. I mean, we've been hearing about him. I love the fact that it's so bipartisan.
Yes.
It's just totally bipartisan. It has not been politicized. It's one of the few things that hasn't been politicized, I love it.
Really hasn't. Yeah.
And then,
that should probably be what we focus on, is just keeping it bipartisan, not letting it devolve into these partisan arguments. I could see that maybe happening.
I don't know. I don't really see it because the issue inherently is so apolitical. I don't know. Let's just hope it stays that way. And also Congressman Ruben Gallego has been behind this too. And I had a chance to meet him in Washington. And anyway, he was one of the Congress people who was behind it. So there are definitely, and even Lindsey Graham came out in a press release through Rubio's office in support of this. So it's a pretty hard thing to not support. It's a national security problem as they see it. And how could they not support, things are flying around our Navy ships and buzzing our pilots when they're in the protected airspace and we don't know what they are. I mean, who could possibly not stand behind trying to find out more about that? I don't think there's much opposition to it. And they have actually written in some of these press releases the importance of overcoming the stigma. So they're recognizing that there is a stigma and that we need to get beyond that. And that's also really important.
Yeah, that was in the preliminary assessment.
Right.
Yeah, there's a big section in there just denoting that there is a stigma.
Exactly. And Rubio's press release or same with Gillibrand's press release, I mean, they both said the same thing. They reiterated that. So it just sort of takes the media off the hook and it takes witnesses off the hook and it invites everyone to care about it. And I don't see how it may not be top priority for everybody, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's going to be opposition to it.
Once it's written down like it is, in law now, signed into law, I think all those military people, there should be no obstacle to them speaking now.
I agree. I mean, there probably still will be. There's still, I think there's still fears of ridicule and stuff when you're active duty, but it's got to have changed. It's got to be a lot better than it was. I mean, and I think people like Dave Fravor have really been role models, and Alex Dietrich too, have been role models to try to encourage others to do what they've done. Yeah, it's just so when you think back to where we were before 2017, to me, it's just stunning how far we've come in the last 4 years. And we've ended up with this incredible legislation. And who would have ever thought this would happen? I mean, it's just, incredible.
Yeah. So you had, when you were at that meeting, and with Lou Elizondo, did you think this was even possible? Maybe yeah, at that time, did you
I
think
mean,
it would get to this point?
I didn't think that far ahead, Chris. All I thought
Yeah.
about was getting this to the New York Times.
Yes.
Period. I couldn't think ahead. Well, maybe someday we'll have legislation. No, I mean, I certainly knew it was a huge story and that it could change everything. But I wasn't thinking specifically about that at that point. So, yeah, but
And now you're, so what, just talking specifically, you've investigated the UAP phenomena for so long, or the UAPs. So what is your, what is your take on it now? What's your overall impression? Where should we be looking? If you're an investigator like myself, what avenues are you aiming at, I guess?
Well, I mean, since I'm a journalist, my focus is to try to get it out into the media. I use the media as a way of reaching people. So that's what I'm doing with this major series that's going to be on a major network in this year, at the middle of this year. So,
Cool.
I mean, that's always, and then I want to keep writing stories for the Times if I can. It's very difficult to get something at the level that the Times requires, but when you do it, it has a huge impact. I did write a story for the Debrief last year, so I'm maybe start writing. But for me, it's about getting things out into the public through the media, because that's how I work. But other people have other ways of doing it, and everybody contributes through whatever talents they have and whatever avenues they use. And I'll just keep doing that, and I'll keep trying to push stories out, as best I can.
So what do you think the UAP is? What do you think the phenomena is? Do you have any
I don't know. I think
impressions?
it's way more complicated than we have thought, or than I had thought. I mean, I've learned over recent years it's just way more complicated. It seems to have properties that are really weird. It's not just some physical object flying in from some other planet. It's got all kinds of paranormal aspects to it. I think that the Skinwalker Ranch book that came out recently, Jacques Vallée was the person who was onto this a long time ago, and everybody just sort of didn't like it, didn't like thinking of it as a more complicated phenomenon. But I think that's what it is. I don't think it's certainly not something manufactured by people on this planet. I'm willing to say that. My position has always been, we don't know what it is. And I still have that position, but I think I'm more willing to say now that we can rule out that it's created on Earth. I just don't see how it could possibly be, for so many reasons. And given what it can do, and the effects it's had on people, and the sort of bizarre technology that and the fact that there's so many different types of objects.
Yes.
It just seems incredibly mysterious and complex to me. And we may never really understand fully what it is and how it does what it does. But it's not simple. And so I don't know what else to say.
What do you think of implants?
I don't know. It seems like, I'm no expert on it, but it seems to me that there's never been any study that's been really, really definitive to show, this material could not possibly have been made on Earth. It could be a very strange thing. It could be like, I don't know how that got into the person's body, and all kinds of things, but I don't think any of them have been proven to be really anomalous, really not from Earth. As far as I know, but again, it's not an area that I focus on. I'm really not focused as much on that element of it, but I think it's fascinating. And I think the work that Gary Nolan and Jacques Vallée are doing, Gary Nolan's a scientist from Stanford,
yes,
are to study physical materials, had allegedly come from UFOs, is really important. And eventually there might be a breakthrough with their work where they have enough sophisticated equipment now to determine how, that it's extremely unlikely that some of these things could have been manufactured here. So that's another thread of work that's really important. And I think, you know, Gary's going to be working on publishing papers and bringing more of that information out to the public. And that's something we have to look forward to as well.
There's so many angles. Lately, I've been into the orbs, you know, kind of trying to look into the orbs off the East Coast, West Coast. It just keeps coming up, like these just balls of light, or you know, that you can see primarily in infrared, but
Right.
in optical, they don't show up in the visual spectrum, or they're harder to see. But in infrared, they show up. It seems like these orbs. Have you had a lot of dealings with that? I didn't read so many in your book, actually, of just straight orbs.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't working at all. I wasn't dealing with orbs at all when I did the book. It was much more concrete, you know, radar data, physical stuff. But I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who have seen orbs, and people see them. And as they wrote about in the Skinwalker book, they're dangerous. You don't want to get too close to them. They can be dangerous. That's what's so weird about it. I don't know if you recall the case of the guy in his car who had one come in and went through his body, and he got
went through his arm or something.
Yeah, I mean, people get very ill from getting too close to orbs. So it's like, stay away from them if you can. But they do. People see them a lot. People encounter them. I don't think it's just in the infrared. People actually see them. And I don't know what they are. They seem to be some kind of device that's maybe gathering information or something, but nobody knows. Nobody knows what they are, but there are people who are studying the physical effects on people. And that was one of the things in the legislation that we were talking about. And orbs is one of the things that causes these physical effects that are harmful to people. So
yeah, I think that came out of NARCAP. It was in a majority of their sightings with orbs, at least from civilian airlines, there was some electrical issue associated with it. It affected some equipment, like their navigation equipment, you know, their compasses, or actual lights started going out, or electrical systems started failing. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, I think it wasn't just orbs. I just think any kind of UFO that they encountered. Because I remember I used to work with NARCAP. But
okay, excellent.
Yeah, what could affect the instruments in the plane for sure. Whatever it was, you know. So yeah, and then if it can affect instruments, it can also affect the human body, right?
Yes. Yeah, it means some sort of field's going through there.
And you know, when you think about an orb that's actually right in front of you, or actually goes through your body, or is in the same room as you, you know, you got to be careful, because we don't know what they are and how they're going to affect people. And as I was saying, people have become very ill from that. So
yeah, I was very happy to see the human effects put in. Do you think it's related, or do you have any knowledge on it being related to Havana syndrome? Is it a separate thing?
It's interesting you bring that up. I mean, yes, people have, you know, I don't know how much I can say about it publicly, but some of the medical effects between the two are very similar, between Havana syndrome and some of these UAP encounters. I mean, I don't think that means they're necessarily the same. The source is the same, but the effects, there are a lot of the effects that are the same. That's pretty interesting. It's very intriguing.
Coincidental.
I don't know. There's some relationship, but I don't think it's known. I mean, there are people working on that. I don't think it's known why that is or what's going on. And certainly there's not, if they know, they're not talking about it. It's a lot of it's probably classified, you know, about Havana syndrome, but there are similarities. Absolutely. There are.
Your surviving death book. So did you find any parallels with the phenomena?
I mean, that is such a big question that I'm just starting to learn more about. I mean, there are paranormal effects that UFOs have on people, which are similar to, for instance, near-death experiences that people have, you know, where they will go into the afterlife realm when they're basically dead and the brain isn't supposed to work. And then they'll come back and remember everything that happened. And sometimes after those experiences, people have psychic abilities that they didn't have before. they have clairvoyant abilities. They experience telepathy. They have precognitive dreams. And the same thing can happen to people who see a UFO or get close to a UFO or have some kind of encounter with a UFO. They develop these paranormal abilities that they didn't have before. So that's just a very simplistic way of illustrating one possible connection, that there's some kind of dimension or even a state of consciousness that people have that is similar in both scenarios. You know, yeah, and I don't know what that's about, but it's something to do with human consciousness and how our consciousness interacts with these phenomena, how we interact with, you know, leaving our bodies, for instance, and going somewhere else, and then, or how we react with consciousness when we encounter something that's this interdimensional or something from another world or from some other plane of existence, which is a UFO. I mean, I don't think that you can pinpoint UFOs as just something physical anymore. You know, that's sort of how I've changed in my perspective. They're not just physical. And so I think that consciousness is impacted in the same way by UFOs and through some of these other experiences that deal with it, you know, things that happen to people close to death or related to that. So, I mean, I don't know how to put it all together, but there's something really intriguing about that. And I know there are people who know a lot more about that connection than I do. There are people who have been really trying to study that connection. I know Whitley Strieber is one person who's done that, who's really focused on that connection. He in some of the letters, you know, when he wrote his book Communion in the 1980s, many of the letters he got from people describing their experiences involved seeing deceased people when they were having a UFO experience, which he took note of at the time. Like, why are they seeing deceased people in a in a close encounter experience? There's some kind of overlap. And so I think that's sort of a new frontier that a lot of people are interested in kind of understanding better. I certainly am. And there are people that understand it better than I do. But what is that all about? You know, it's pretty interesting to see if there is, and what role does human consciousness play in all of this? Just the way we perceive things and how we're affected by things. You know, and all of that has to be looked at. And so that's, I'm really interested in trying to understand all of that better.
That is interesting. I was talking to another YouTuber, Artisan Tony. I've worked with him a little bit. He's a contract guy, lives in Tennessee, character. But he mentioned that when he was 10, I got him to talk online about his experience. When he was around 10 years old, he came into contact with a blue orb. He says an orb, and he couldn't move, and he wasn't afraid of it. Which was terrifying to him actually later because he wasn't afraid.
Right.
So,
that's so many people have said that too, that they're amazed they weren't afraid. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, it was like they had a cutoff switch or something. He said they had some off switch on him. And what he says, kind of what you just related there, is that it seems like it was now he can pick up on other things. Like it was affected his receive capability or transmit capability or something in his brain. So he mentioned, yeah, there's something different, whereas he thinks coming into contact with these things can physically change somehow, affect how your brain actually works.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Gary, other people are studying too. There are scientists who are looking at the brains of people who have had these experiences and seeing if there are qualities in the human brain that correspond to people who have these experiences that other people don't have. And there's, really interesting data around that. So that's another area of investigation, is like, can you actually see something in the brain, that's changed, or that's unique to people who have experiences like this. So all the
physical evidence.
So interesting. Yeah, it's really, really mysterious.
And so why why don't they show us? You know, if the UAP is here, why hide? Do you feel like the phenomenon is hiding from us, or is this just how it is? I don't. What is?
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to project like intention or
Yeah.
purpose onto it because I have no idea. I mean, it's obviously not landing and saying here we are, you know, or
Yes.
giving us something to really, really, really get a close look at. But whether it's intentionally doing that, I have no way of knowing, or if it's just doing its thing. I mean, we don't even know what this thing is, right? So it's hard to know very much about what's going on with its behavior. So I don't know. I just tend to not want to speculate about it.
Yeah. Just find the evidence. Go for.
I don't know. I mean, it doesn't really matter what I think they're doing or not doing. It's like,
Yes.
I mean, yeah. Obviously, I mean, if there's some, you know, what intrigues me is there is an intelligence behind these things. Obviously.
Okay. Yeah. I guess that's what I'm.
There's
asking.
an intelligence there. It's been demonstrated many, many times. And so, what is that? Where is it coming from? What's the source of that intelligence? Is there something, you know, there's obviously something controlling the, like, let's say the tic tac, you know, controlling its behavior. Is that something inside it or outside of it? Or, and, you know, what is its intention in kind of having this cat and mouse thing where it's going around with Dave Fravor, you know, meeting him and then going to his cap point and showing up. I mean, it's the intelligence that's so intriguing.
How else would you define intelligence? So when you see something and you say that's intelligence, you know, what is it? You know.
Well, what I mean by that is it's responsive. You know, it's not just operating in some independent mechanical way where it's just going around in circles or something. It's actually responsive and interactive with jets, with Navy jets, with pilots, or, you know, and as was demonstrated with Dave Fravor and has been demonstrated with other cases. I mean,
so an intelligence, I guess it doesn't mean it's a high intelligence, you know, it could be a lower intelligence, I guess, you know.
It's just, you know, when something's responding to you and taking actions according to what you're doing in that moment, that's what I call intelligence. I mean, maybe that's not the right word, but, you know, so many military officials, so many officials have said over the years, they operate as if they are under intelligent control.
Intelligent control. Yeah.
Intelligent
so something
control. Something is in controlling them to the extent that these things can in the moment be responsive and interactive, you know.
So it's not just a weird projection. Yeah,
they're relating to the stimuli around them and responding to that. And so they're more than just some kind of purely mechanical drone or something. There's somebody in charge of it, right? Or some force, something that is able to allow it to be responsive. I mean, we don't know how that works or what it is. But I think the word intelligence is the one that generally people have used.
Because I mean, you know, if you get two magnets of the same, you know, and it repels, you know, you're still affecting it, but it could be something we don't understand. I guess that would be the only.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many cases, like in the case of the Peruvian case, which the pilot wrote a chapter about that case in my book in 1980. Yes. And he was like, you know, he'd go up and then the UFO would go up and stop right at the same level he was at. Yes. And then he'd go up again and the thing would go again and stop right next to him. I mean, that's responsive behavior. That object was aware of what this pilot was doing and it was acting accordingly. So that's what I'm talking about when I say intelligence or intelligent control. I mean, I don't know what other word to use.
Yeah, I don't either. I just was curious on your thought on what does intelligence, you know, mean, or how do you identify it? In the same, like I had the same thought, you know, when Dave Fravor, when he descends down to try and see the tic tac, and then the tic tac comes up to him, you know, that obviously, it's maneuvering in response to him.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's happened in many cases. I mean, the Jafari, General Jafari's case from Iran in
That was another cool one.
1976. I mean, he also wrote a chapter. It's just so cool to hear these guys tell their own stories. But that there was some huge object up there that was actually sending projectiles out. They were heading right for his plane. So that's
Yes.
some kind of intelligence, right?
Yes.
And then his equipment would go out. He was trying to shoot a missile at these objects, these little things, because he felt he had to defend himself. And he would lock onto the object. And then when it got to be a certain distance from him or closeness to him, all his equipment would go out. And he couldn't fire his missile. And then once it moved away, so there again, we've talked about them impacting the electrical equipment in
Yes.
planes. And we don't know if that's intentional on the part of the objects or if it's just that they're emanating some kind of radiation that just does that automatically. I mean, Jafari's interpretation was he felt like it was intentional to him, but there's no way to know. The same thing with the shutting down of the nukes. I mean, people like to say, oh, they're giving us a message that we shouldn't be involved with nuclear war by shutting down our nukes. I mean, I think that's a leap that we can't make. I think that it's conceivable that that object just had some emanation or some kind of radiation associated with it, or force field that had that effect on the nukes. I mean, it seems somewhat unlikely to me because it was so specific to the nukes. I don't know, but there's no way to know what is intention and what is just happening because of the nature of the object itself, But but if you have a huge, gigantic, triangular, brilliantly lit strobe thing sitting there in the sky, firing out projectiles towards you, I think you could call that intelligence, right? It's
yes.
not sort of automatically happening. So that's the kind of thing that I find, anyway, what is the force behind it all that's able to be responsive like that? And that's the biggest, that's what everybody wants to know, obviously.
Yeah, I'm excited for the James Webb Space Telescope. That should be coming online here in a few months.
Yeah.
That may tell us something, at least about the outer universe,
Totally. And then I think there's other countries too that are probing space that may be more forthcoming if they do see some anomalies than our government would be. But yeah, and I think the work of the Galileo project is also going to be really interesting. I mean,
yes.
It's so interesting that this Harvard astronomer who was pretty much a debunker about UFOs or was completely scornful of them has now come around to wanting to try to capture data himself on UAP because he gets it.
Yeah.
It just shows the
Avi
power.
Loeb, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, Avi Loeb. I mean, the power of our government legitimizing this has a huge impact on, and the scientific community are sort of the last ones to come around. But I think with his leadership, I mean, he's really been a force, Avi Loeb, of mobilization for science, and it's just fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, he came on. He was my first interview, actually, and very inspiring. Very inspiring.
Was that back when his book came out, before he had kind of opened up to UFOs, or was it?
No, this was in August. So after the
after he founded the Galileo, probably.
Yep, it was right after the Galileo project came out, and so I interviewed him about that.
August. He's really a force out there.
Yeah, he goes on all podcasts. I was really happy to have him on, and yeah, he was amazing, very inspiring.
Yeah, I agree. I've had some communications with him, and he's just playing a really important role in all of this. So
yeah, I hope it would be great though. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying it's another project that we have to look forward to for next year and the years to follow.
Yeah, there's so many projects. I'm so excited for 2022.
Right. We can forget about COVID and focus on how wonderful all of this stuff is.
Yes, hopefully. Yeah, hopefully COVID will end. We'll find out the truth this year.
Or we'll find out more anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And then this is, I guess, my own personal question on book writing. Just, I know it's not really on topic of UAPs, but it was interesting. That book you mentioned, you had 18 different people put it together. But how do you go about editing your books? What is your process, I guess, as a fellow author or aspiring author in my case?
I mean, I do a first draft, which is just like spewing out, not even thinking about the writing, just getting the ideas down. And then for me, writing is really about editing. I mean, the craft of writing is about going over and over and over it. But it's the hardest part is getting that first draft out. And then you just have to craft the writing, and that's just a very long process. And I find that you have to walk away from it for a little bit of time and come back fresh. It's a long process, but and they're just constant drafts that I do to refine the writing, and I might bring more material in or whatever. But then, because I publish with Random House, I also have an editor that's given to me by the publisher. So I do a lot of it myself to get it at the best level I can, but I love having the input from outside editors. And,
nice.
Also showing it to colleagues and getting feedback and things like that, because what happens as a writer is you become so familiar with what you're doing that you lose perspective on it. That's another problem for any writer. It's like, it's just too familiar. And to have outside eyes look at something is really, really valuable. I would highly encourage that when you get it to a certain point, and you'll get feedback that's really helpful, because then somebody's reading it who isn't you, and so that's like your person who you're writing it for, and you want to know what their reaction is, and you're not going to see everything yourself. It's just impossible to see it all yourself. I mean, every writer needs a good editor. That's a lot of people don't like that, but I do. I really benefit a lot and value the input of editors. So
do you write every day, or do you write a few hours every day, or do you write all in one big, how do you work?
Depends on, what kind of deadline I'm on. I mean, when I'm writing a book, I would probably write every day. When I was writing Surviving Death, I'm trying to remember, or I'd be thinking about it every day, or there might be some days where I would just be doing research or something and not writing, but you have to take little breaks from it, or it becomes too familiar. You have to step away and then read it as if you didn't write it, as if it's just something completely new that you have to just read it with this kind of fresh mind. And you're going to see things that you couldn't see if you just stayed with it every single day, So stepping
100%.
away is really important.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing now. Yeah, just hope I go back.
People think that it's really easy to write well, but it's not. Writing is a craft. It's a work. You don't just sit down and write a book.
No.
It's this long process that there's a lot that goes into if you're trying to write something really well. I mean, for some people, they just want to get their information out, and that's okay too. But the art of writing is not easy. It's really not. I mean, every sentence gets scrutinized, and you got to worry about things like word repetitions and the flow, the way it feels, the rhythm of the writing, the flow of the words. It's just, there's a lot that goes into it, at least for me. And,
100%.
Yeah, I need time, even when I'm writing just an article. I mean, I might spend a week with it just fiddling with the language, and it might just be here and there, but it can really end up making a huge difference in the long run. It's that sort of fine tuning of how you're expressing it, and that I feel to be so important. And if I feel rushed to write something, I don't have the time to do that. I'm not going to be happy. That's if I'm writing on my own. When I'm writing with colleagues, like for the New York Times, it's very different, because the Times does all the editing, and they do a lot of editing. So we don't have to worry as much about our craft of writing so much. It has to be the style of the New York Times, but there's heavy duty editing coming from the outside, and that I don't have as much control over it. But
who came up with the name for Glowing Auras and Black Money? Do you remember?
I don't even know, but it sure was not us. It
Yeah,
was
it wasn't.
not us.
Yeah.
We turn in the story and we get it back with a headline.
Yes.
And the print headline was different. Print headline was much better. I think I have a copy of it. Oh, the print headline, it's right here. Are UFOs real? Secret Pentagon unit tried to know. Now, I like that headline much better than the one that was online.
Yes.
So, but there are people at the Times whose sole job is to write headlines for stories. That's all they do. And the writers have no control over it. Zero. So that's all I can say about that headline. Yeah, I mean, the print edition, I guess I don't have the first page here. Yeah, it's right behind me. Real UFOs, question mark.
Cool.
Pentagon unit tried to know. I mean, I have it here on my wall. I don't know if you can see it, but.
Cool. I'll find a better image of it.
I just like that headline better than the one on the line, but so I don't know. They maybe were trying to sort of say something really catchy that would attract a lot of attention. Yeah, the journalists have no say in headlines at the New York Times, unfortunately.
I guess what I've learned the most from this talk is it seems like the evidence is already there. You know, it seems like all of these cases already exist. I guess I was most surprised looking at it, reading your book, was how much evidence there is.
It's stunning, right?
Yeah.
It's stunning. And it's taken how long to get our government to officially acknowledge that? It's just, but it's a loaded topic. So, you know, but it's really stunning. I mean, that's the point I was at too when I wrote that book. I was just, because I'd spent 10 years on this stuff. It was just incredible to me how much evidence there was. There's no way that all these cases could be explained away. And even if it's only a few of them, that's enough.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. One case should be enough, you know?
Exactly. I mean, Stanton Friedman always used to say that. It only takes one UFO to be, so we've had I mean, and you go back to the 50s and 60s when the same observations were made, and there is no way that any country had this technology then. And the behavior of the objects hasn't changed. We just have more data on it now, but these things were reported back during the Cold War, right? When nobody had the technology that these objects were demonstrating. It's just impossible. So, you know, if you look back in history, it makes the argument even stronger that these are not from Earth.
Yeah, because it stays the same. You know, in the 50s, we had radar contacts. We chased them with fighters. And we had visual observers, photographs. And today we have the same thing. You know, we have radar contacts.
Probably it's more sophisticated today, and I'm sure we have a lot more. I mean, I know we do. I know that the Pentagon is sitting on all kinds of spectacular photos and videos and radar and all kinds of data. I mean, Lou Elizondo has informed us that there's one video that's 23 minutes long, and it has multiple craft in it, maneuvering in ways that are just stunning. That it's kind of definitive, that video. And yet we're not allowed, the humanity is not allowed to have access to that.
Yeah,
for whatever reason. No, it's not right. I mean, if there are national security elements to it, like they don't want to reveal certain data that's on the screen or something, there's ways of removing that or just showing part of the video but you know, it's not a concern of these people to try to make any of this available to the public. I mean, most of them their job is to protect information from our adversaries, and that's what they're trying to do. So they just have a different mindset. But there's data.
Yeah.
You're right. There is so much evidence and information, and we don't even know a lot of it because it's classified.
Yes.
It's way more than what we think or than what we're aware of.
That's what you hear, but then they don't release anything. You know, I mean, there was nothing after those. There was the 3 videos that you saw back in 2017, right?
Yeah.
And since then, it's been nothing.
No more visuals. I mean, the stuff that leaked out through Jeremy Corbell has come out.
Yes, that was excellent.
And there was some photographs that I remember George Knapp put out that I actually had been sitting on for a few years because I wasn't supposed to release them. But,
Yes.
you know, nothing compared to what I know that they do have from sources I've spoken to. I mean, the quality of what they have and is just way higher than what we've seen. And these things are sitting there in the vault, and there are people that want them to come out. So maybe they will.
Yeah, I don't see why they don't, well, I mean, yeah, I see why, but they should release it.
They should. I mean, their argument is that they don't want our adversaries to be aware of what we know because there's all this competition, because everybody's trying to figure out how the technology works. So they probably don't want to give our adversaries any clues about that technology any more than they already have. So that's, and that's their mentality at the Department of Defense. And
Yes.
I sort of understand it, but I'm not fighting for that position. I'm fighting for the opposite position. Not that I don't respect their position, but I think there is more that could come out in a way that would not be a danger to national security, just because humanity has a right to this, as far as I see it.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, my experience in the military, I was there 20 years plus, is they're just overly conservative with classified information. They overclassify everything, and then no one will say, yeah, we can release that. No one, I met so many people be like, look, I'm going to cover this number up, whatever. I'm going to cover this classified section up. So there's nothing classified on the image, and they would not sign off on it, and they say, I'm not going to jail. I'm not going to jail. I'm like, you're not going to go to jail, but.
Well, if it's officially declassified, nobody goes to jail. You only go to jail if you release something that's classified that you're not supposed to release.
But the problem is no one will officially declassify.
I know. Well, I mean,
they're the people. Yeah.
It's a process you have to go through. But what's interesting is a lot of the stuff that was at AATIP was never classified in the first place. I mean, those 3 videos were not classified. And
I'm 3 sure Navy videos, or
they were not classified originally. There was a process they had to go to get approval for them to be publicly released, which they went through. And I have the document, and I think it may have been released by now. But I had all this stuff back in 2017, the document that showed the approval by the Department of Defense and listed those 3 videos, which was another reason we knew they were legitimate at the time. We just weren't going to release our documents. But they weren't classified. They were just cleared for public release, and they were unclassified. And there are probably other videos in there that are unclassified. I mean, I'm sure the best ones are made. Who knows? But you're right. The tendency is to just automatically classify as much as possible.
Yes.
And then once it's classified, it's hard. Even though there's a process to declassify it, it's a bureaucracy, and it's harder to do that. It's harder to get it released than it would be if it wasn't classified in the first place. So it's the mentality of the agencies that control this information, is just to keep everything classified. I mean, it's the same thing at the 3-letter agencies and everywhere,
There's no incentive for them to release,
Exactly. Because their goal is not to please the public. That's not what they're about. So they think of themselves as protecting whatever, or investigating and protecting the public. And so it's just a different mentality. And then you have the few lone people in those worlds who maybe leave, or even those inside who do want it to come out. But they're not the majority, I don't think.
Hopefully that's changing. I mean, if they're directed to, maybe they'll have to.
I think that when you get members of Congress on this, demanding information, that's a huge change. That's a huge game changer. Exactly. That's very different from the New York Times or a public, citizens group demanding information. You get members of Congress, they have to deliver. So that's what the real game changer. That's why this legislation is so important.
It's funny too, because nothing on the phenomena side changed. We didn't really get any more evidence than we had, right? We've had tons of evidence, it sounds like, in the past. What's changed is us, or our side. Your methods seem to have been the most effective, if that makes sense.
Well, at least in getting the ball rolling, it was effective.
Yes.
But I think our elected officials have really been the people that have moved the ball down. I mean, if Congress had never gotten involved, I don't think we would have made, that much progress. I mean, they're the ones that took the ball and got the briefings. And they were confronted with having to deal with this classified information. I mean, you can only imagine. I mean, we wrote a story in July 2020 for the Times, the last one that Ralph Blumenthal and I did together, about physical materials, crash retrievals, and members of Congress being briefed on that. I mean, that's got to change their perspective, There's so much that they've been told that we don't know about. So having them take charge is really what's important. And that's why things are moving forward, as I see it. So, and I think public pressure is really important too. I mean, the DOD acknowledging that the videos were real, and the Navy changing its reporting guidelines, and all these things that have happened are partly, of course, due to public pressure. And that will continue, I'm sure. But we've scored. We got a victory here by getting members of Congress involved in this, to the extent that they have set up this office now that has specific mandate to do the things we want done.
Yes, the exact things.
Yeah, it's a question of how much of that the public is going to be shown and how much of it is going to remain classified. I mean, that's going to be the challenge, because there'll be both unclassified reports and classified reports. And I think that the members of Congress who represent the people, hopefully, will want as much of it to come out as possible.
Yeah, I hope so. See, it seems like. I mean, I've been very impressed actually by the Congress members. Yeah, the ones you mentioned, Heinlein, again, he also had a good quote on it. So it seems like it's Heinrich, yes.
Yeah. So. I mean, I think Gillibrand, she's been amazing.
Yes.
And she's the senator from New York, which is my state, so I'm proud of that. And Rubio, and we have this conservative Republican and this Democrat who have kind of spearheaded this thing. It's just fantastic. So
yeah, it is.
I think Gillibrand is probably more oriented towards public exposure maybe than Rubio is. I don't know, but I think we're going to move more and more, and we have people like Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo working behind the scenes who care deeply about this information coming out. And we cannot underestimate the role that they've played in all of this. I mean, they've made it happen, basically. They've had tremendous influence on the members of Congress who have taken steps to make these things happen. So they're just absolutely phenomenal what they've been able to accomplish. We should all recognize that.
Yeah, they have been amazing. Lou Elizondo, starting with Harry Reid, we lost him recently.
Right.
It's really changed my perspective. When you were talking earlier about surviving death, the consciousness, basically seeing deceased people. Up until this last year, I was just a devout atheist, essentially. I believe none of that stuff. And now it seems like it's possible. Now I'm like, it's changed my view. Like, it's literally changed my paradigm, which is very interesting. Very interesting.
And you can be an atheist and still understand that maybe consciousness survives. It's not about believing in a God.
Yeah.
So atheism, I think of that as, well, you don't believe in God. You don't have to believe in God. You just have to look at cases and things that have happened and studies that have been done to think that, well, maybe when the physical body dies, there's some part of us, some element of our consciousness that will continue on. And that's the question, but it doesn't require any belief system in any particular religion. It has nothing to do with religion or even beliefs, really. It's just a matter of looking at it, what's happened, and looking at the data and deciding how you're going to interpret it. And it's also interesting because these are things that people can choose to have experiences with, which you cannot do with UFOs. You can't decide, I'm going to see one, right? But with this material about consciousness, you can do things like go to a medium, and try to contact somebody who's died, or have various experiences that will show you directly. And, or if you lose somebody, you might get signs, things that you think are messages from them. I wrote about those things in my book as well, because some of these things happened to me personally. And I actually took the risk of including that in my book. So it's about evidence, it's about research, but it's also about what happened to me when I had these experiences. And, you know, it changes your worldview when you can have the experiences yourself. And I think that's one thing that's so wonderful is you can choose to do that in a, you know, with various elements of this consciousness work, you know, this consciousness realm, in a way that you can't do with UFOs. So,
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
100%. I'm gonna read your book,
Well,
Surviving
I'd be
Death.
happy to talk to you about it when you read it.
Yeah, yeah, that would be cool. I guess, but you have to put your eye up to the telescope. You know, you have to be remotely open to the idea. I think. You know, I think that's why the UFOs have never hit. You could get no traction at all back in 2000. You know, because people would not even consider it. You know, they wouldn't even look. Like Galileo, you know, they wouldn't put their eye up to the telescope at all.
You're right.
And I wouldn't have, you know, before this year, I wouldn't have tried to do any of the media or even considered it, you know, like, or meditating or these medium investigations or I wouldn't have even considered it. You know, it would have been, I wouldn't have
Right.
looked. I just
So
wouldn't have even put my eye.
which means you wouldn't read the book, basically. I mean, the
Yes.
people who are totally not interested are just not going to read it.
Yeah.
The people that do read it, they're not going to be able to walk away from this book and say there's nothing to any of this. You just can't possibly do that if you read the book.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. I watched another interview where you talked more about it. The fast gamma speeds of the brain. Have you heard that argument? I don't know.
I don't think that. I mean, no, I'm not sure I have.
It was basically when there's different brain wavelengths. You know, you go alpha, delta, theta. I guess there's a fast gamma. It's very fast, up at 80 hertz. And supposedly when you're dying, when you're physically dying, your brain will go to that hertz level.
Oh yeah.
And so the idea is when you don't die, so you come back from death, that's you've kind of transitioned to that other dimension or whatever. And now you're coming back. So that's, maybe you can bring back those whatever those experiences. And then this Alexei Novitsky, he's the one that told me about it. He said this relates to DMT as well, like the drug DMT. They say, and again, this is all anecdotal, I haven't really investigated yet, it also puts you in a fast gamma state. So when people talk about these weird DMT trips, you know, they're talking to like elves or gnomes or something. They report it to talking to beings.
Right. And what is, and I wonder if, I mean, sometimes they might see UFOs too.
I don't know.
I mean, when people take ayahuasca, sometimes they'll encounter UFOs, which is, again, that's another example of the role of consciousness in all of this, another mysterious element, you know. And is there some kind of interconnection between the realm of consciousness and UFOs and even beings that people might associate with aliens or whatever? They cross over into these different realms that have to do with consciousness. And yeah, you know, I don't know what that means, but yeah, it's all fascinating. That's all I can say. But it's all fascinating to me. I mean, the consciousness questions to me are just as interesting as the UFO question. And I think most interesting is trying to learn more about the relationship between them.
So maybe it is not naive, but I have this hope, I guess, that this topic particularly has the potential to kind of, you know, unify humanity, maybe to where we think more of ourselves as one, or as our own team, or cooperate together instead of just slaughtering each other.
I mean, I actually wrote about that in the introduction to Surviving Death. Because I have that same hope, and I hold out that same possibility, even though it might be a little naive or idealistic or simplistic. I don't know, but I did write about it. I do think it could have that potential. Both UFOs and consciousness studies, I think it could unify people more. I mean, I agree with you. I hope it can have that effect. I don't know if it will, but it's a wonderful thing to hold that vision and to make that be part of the motivation for doing this work, yeah, because we're all, it puts us more in a cosmic perspective as opposed to an individual perspective, especially if we realize that we're not alone in the universe and there's other dimensions of reality and there's all this stuff going on. That's, the whole materialist paradigm is going to have to change. And that's going to affect how we interpret who we are, right? Which affects how we relate to each other and how we see each other. So that's what makes it a real paradigm shift. And I hope that one of the outcomes of that is perhaps a sense of greater unity of ourselves as one planet, as opposed to, like you said. So that's a good thing to hope for, right?
Yeah, world peace. That would be amazing. I don't know. But
I
anyway,
don't know if we'll ever have that, but maybe people will have more of an understanding of their connection to each other, and their sameness, their underlying consciousness that's something bigger than just our physical bodies, that we all are part of the same realm of consciousness, or something like that. That it just, I live with that. I feel that. So it just changes your perspective. And
it brought the thought of the book, editing a book. You mentioned, maybe we'll realize we're not just all on our own. You get other feedback, from outside, and then maybe that'll get us out of our own head,
Yeah, it's a good metaphor,
Better idea, a bigger picture. Yeah, like you said, there's enough resources and money in the world, there's enough evidence. We just need to go and look at it. I think it's kind of how it works.
And try to put it all together. That's the challenge. How does it all interrelate to each other, and that's a fascinating challenge. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Leslie. Thanks for all your time.
It was great talking with you, Chris. Thank you for your work you're doing, and you have a fantastic podcast, and I encourage you to keep going, and I'm glad you've come on board with this.
Yeah, thanks. No, I'm glad I've been accepted, hopefully in the UFO community. But yeah, thanks for all the work you've done. Thanks for the book. Excellent book, the UFOs, and thanks all. It sounds like Surviving Death is also a great book. I'm sure it is. So thank you, Leslie. And
thanks, Chris. It was great speaking with you. Take care.
Okay. Take care.